This will be my second video in English. I have to read again from my script. I repeatedly notice that the simple word I seems to be a major problem in spirituality, and it is used very differently. So there is nothing simple or easy about it. For many people it also seems to leave a rather negative impression or is understood in a certain way. Personally, I already consider the physical existence as a body I. The body for me is the foundation of everything. Even in the womb, one develops a basic state of awareness and perception. Later on, instinctive actions and expressions are added, as well as interaction with other people. At some point, learning to speak begins, and that is also part of being human. There have been terrible experiments in the past without contact, without relationship, or without language. A human either becomes terribly distressed, cannot develop at all, or even dies. So it is obviously an integral part of being human, and for me it is definitely the foundation of I. This is my fork with which I eat, and I can learn how to hold it better. More things will come, and then it slowly builds up more and more. My toys, my bed, my mother, and so on. And so everything that is part of being human gradually develops. Otherwise, we could only live like, say, some species or apes. For me, this is clearly the basis of I. So the question of whether there is an I or not is completely irrelevant to me. It is obvious that there is an I. In deep sleep, of course, there is a pause in that, and in deep meditation as well. So it's not a question of black or white, yes or no, but more or less. It is simply part of being human, sometimes more, sometimes less. In deep sleep or in deepest Samadhi, there is no consciousness, but of course the body is always there. It is still sitting in the chair, and in deep sleep it is still lying in bed. Except maybe for reality deniers. So this whole foundation is absolutely indisputable. This is a human being, whether you want to call it I or not. That's up for debate. Everything else that comes on top of it is often shaped by developmental trauma. There are, of course, many strategies and patterns, suffering, struggles, irritations, and things that we cannot bear or tolerate. And for many people, I suspect, as adults, they more or less permanently find themselves subconsciously, involuntarily caught in thoughts, rumination, and ideas, continually revisiting them. They don't primarily feel at home in their body, meaning they are not well embodied. They feel their body more or less, but they are not truly at home in the body. I suspect that, even if they are not consciously aware of it, since they are primarily at home in their thoughts and inner worlds, they tend to rather identify with the body. This is different from truly being embodied. It is, of course, a process that can take many, many years, whether through trauma healing or spiritual inner work. I can say this from my own experience. It is something else entirely to be the body. There's no need then for identification. I don't need to be convinced that I am the body. It simply feels completely natural to me this way. That this is my home, my foundation. And so the absurd question of I or not I doesn't arise for me anymore. Even if no thoughts are present, if everything is completely still, there is simply the instinctive knowledge that I am here as the body, that I am the body. I don't need to think about it. And the sentence, there is no one, doesn't fit here. It simply doesn't resonate with the feeling. It is completely out of place. And when it gets so painful, so exhausting, and so unsatisfying, constantly caught in thoughts, patterns, images, feelings that are hard to tolerate, with which one cannot cope, and so on, constantly struggling and stuck in them, and then such a liberating experience happens, no matter how It looks, and then people say, yes, there is no one, or the I was gone and it feels so amazing, and some then say there is no I. Well, for my taste, this is such a completely lifeless and abstract view, completely nonsensical. No human on this planet lives completely without an I. One would be drooling in the corner because, as I explained earlier, the simple awareness of the body is already part of I. Just recognizing my hand and associating it with myself and recognizing myself in the mirror is already I. A body without anyone at home would not recognize itself in the mirror. This is complete nonsense. So it is clear that a certain amount of I and I-ness belongs to being human. And I would even claim the same for some animals. It doesn't start with conscious reflection. With all these ideas and concepts, it's not about I or not I. The difference is whether there is just a body sitting there where no one is at home, or whether there's already a basic feeling of me being here. And in spirituality, it almost seems to be hated to say I, or somehow no one wants to admit that there still is an I, as if that were inherently something bad. Yes, the painful, tense, frustrated, unconscious, constantly struggling with inner battles and uncomfortable things. Of course, no one wants that. But it's not a solution at all to just claim that there is no one. What's the point of that? And the suffering can only slowly loosen up through inner work, therapy, and spiritual experience, over time becoming more flexible and coming to rest here and there. No, something about the typical spiritual orientations or sayings. I'm giving a broad overview from my own experiences and observations over the last 15 years. That doesn't mean anyone needs this for their happiness. It's very individual. Each person is different. This is why all these claims of truth are so incredibly unhealthy. No matter what experiences one has had or which direction they are going in, one should never lose sight of their own humanity, psychological stability, and being alive. It would be even better to stay focused on that with therapy, coaching, and anything that helps. There are almost no spiritual teachers who adequately support people in this regard. Addictive truth seeking and constantly focusing on a distant goal are always highly suspicious. One very typical claim is that the truth or the true self is pure awareness. Some people mean by that the feeling of the space in which everything happens. Yes, then there is an identification with that. My I, so to speak, shifts, my identification shifts from me, my humanity, and also from my ego towards awareness. Initially, that can feel liberating for some, so it is a possibility to gain distance from the constant thought, not of I, to step out of it. And then it seems to feel like a loss, like a setback when one falls back into it. So people tend to want something other than identifying with themselves, because then they fall back into suffering or frustration. Then there is the variant, there is no one. Maybe someone has had such an experience, like briefly disappearing into nothingness or whatever it may be, often reported. Then some say there is no one. So with this conviction, I also get away from myself, from my I. That is the next formula. Then there is the variant, like with Christian Meyer. It is his experiential path and inner work, which the Indians call Samadhi. He calls it the deeper reality or enlightened being. It is nothing more than, after such a deep awakening experience, it becomes easier with time to let go, for some people, to let go more and more in meditation, and thoughts naturally quiet down because one is able to allow feelings to fully come up and integrate. This is only possible for few people with years of intensive therapeutic preparation, especially body therapy and deep emotional work. The body becomes deeply integrated, not dissociated, but retreats into the background so much that one hardly perceives it, and one sinks deeper, as if dissolving into formless being. Without this preparation and competent guidance, I strongly advise against it. People tend to identify with it as if this deep state is a separate reality. That's another perspective. So one shifts the identification there, perhaps without being fully aware of it. Again, moving away from me. That's the third option, so to speak, to move the identification from my I, my mental I, or just from myself, which always wants to bundle itself together because the structures don't simply vanish. I want to move away from it and need an alternative. And then it is said, the deeper being, that is the reality. Then there is the experience of unity, or everything, nothing and everything, I am everything, or nothing is everything, and all this other bullshit from non-duality. But what almost always doesn't seem to have a real place in the middle, where everything comes together, is me. I can simply say, I am me, and be awake in myself, with everything, my past, my experiences, my states, feelings, thoughts. In me, I am awake, without keeping a state of being disidentified, but also not getting lost unconsciously in old patterns all the time. Of course, this is also a very challenging path. Every path in this direction is naturally very challenging, no matter how it looks. Because you always encounter your trauma, your feelings, and everything isn't easy, and things keep changing all the time. But I just can't understand how, in all these different possibilities, someone could still try to talk themselves out of it somehow, or something like that, you know? Yes, but of course, the problem is also the following. So one person has experienced themselves for a while as awareness or consciousness in which everything happens. Or they experienced themselves repeatedly in Samadhi as a deeper being, or this inner liberation gets refreshed and again and again. However the variation looks. And now, of course, the problem is as follows. Most people have a lot of individual developmental trauma and structures, strategies, patterns within themselves. And there is, of course, a lot of collective stuff under that as well. And everything is stored in the body. And it can be much deeper anchored in the body than one would normally imagine. And that's why these spiritual directions often turn into a conceptual trip with a claim of truth, because for some people it provides a kind of new stability. But it is actually always also a way to avoid deeper personal issues at the same time. And so, of course, the problem is that all these variations, the awareness, the space in which everything happens, the deeper being, Samadhi, the claim that there is no one or whatever, it all feels like everything around me is somehow happening or just goes through myself, but never really gets into me, can never fully permeate me, get integrated, because the body can take an incredibly long time to integrate this. So that I can grow back into myself. But the idea of talking all of this away by saying there is no I, and as Christian Meyer said, the organism gets upset, those are, for my taste, inhuman and actually degrading expressions that lead to misunderstandings and nonsensical mental duplications, excuses, mental acrobatics, and so on. And they have so many disadvantages and unsympathetic side effects. Yes, but somehow it doesn't seem possible for people to have a sensible conversation about what exactly they mean by the term I, and to consider it in a much more differentiated way. That's a shame. Yes, and for me personally, the last 15 years have led me to this, all these different I call them levels or aspects, simply belong to me. It's not the one consciousness, the one space of consciousness, but my consciousness expanded at times into infinity. But it has always belonged to me. There's not just one, everyone has their own. That's how I interpret it now. Back to subjectivity. And deep in Samadhi, that's my formless energy, so to speak, that I sink into. And everything dissolves more and more and becomes quieter, and not the infinity, the one infinity for all, in which everyone bathes when they meditate. And for me, over the last few years, this has integrated so much that I don't even perceive it that way anymore. Now I just rest sometimes in myself, in my stillness, presence, energy, which now is one with my body and doesn't constrict like it used to. The whole thing is a highly neurological and physiological integration process, not a magical happening. And when there's no one, for me, that simply means a state when all the psychological aspects come to complete rest. The whole perception is very lucent and feels fluffy, permeable, and free. And then one could say that's a state. And if someone really wants to, they could call it there's no one. These are all experiences that belong to me, where all the threads meet in me, and they have integrated. They are not truths at all, and mainly I'm simply me as a person, and my remaining patterns and issues also belong to me. Nothing needs to be talked away, nothing needs to be kept away. Well, that's it for the topic of reintegration. It's a tough thing, a really, really long process, and obviously it's not necessarily popular to announce and foresee this, unfortunately. That's why I just wanted to share this. Feel free to leave a question or report in the comments. See you next time. Thanks for watching.